Good morning. For my project, I'll be examining how the co-hosting of the 2002 World Cup affected the relationship between South Korea and Japan. This was the first World Cup ever co-hosted by two nations and offered a chance to show unity on a global stage. But instead of bringing the two countries closer, I argue it exposed deep historical and cultural tensions and helped fuel a nationalist backlash in Japan. Drawing on studies of traditional media, online forums, and nationalist reactions after the tournament, I examined how the World Cup gave momentum to existing anti Korean resentment in the early 2000s. I then traced how this resentment moved beyond online forums and mass media and helped bring nationalist rhetoric into mainstream culture and the public sphere. Before looking at the World Cup, it's important to understand the history between both countries. From 1910 to 1945, Japan ruled Korea as a colony, imposing policies meant to erase Korean culture and identity. Schools taught Japanese history, Korean names were replaced, and dissent was brutally suppressed. This left deep scars that still shape South Korea's view of Japan today. In 1965, Japan and South Korea signed the Treaty on Basic Relations to normalize diplomatic ties, and while Japan provided economic aid, they avoided direct wartime compensation. The deal was controversial, with many Koreans feeling as though it ignored historical justice. This unresolved resentment carried into future conflicts. These controversies over Japan's wartime history, such as the way Japan portrayed World War II in their textbooks, the comfort women, and ongoing disputes over the Dokdo/Takashima Islands, fueled anti-Japanese sentiment in South Korea. These unresolved issues kept public opinion volatile well into the 2000s, setting the stage for deeper conflict during the World Cup. Initially, both countries submitted separate bids and were unwilling to co-host. This led to heated debates between both countries, and to avoid any further conflict, FIFA ultimately forced a joint bid. This compromise only led to more disputes over how the tournament would be marketed, such as who would host the final match and whose name would come first, both of which revealed how fragile the so-called unity really was. Following the announcement that they would co-host the tournament, Prime Minister Hashimoto visited South Korea for a two-day summit talk in June 1996 to discuss issues surrounding the tournament. Upon his arrival, he was confronted by some former comfort women and their supporters. They staged a demonstration and demanded that the Japanese government admit its legal responsibility and pay them compensation. The controversy didn't stop here, as Foreign Minister Lee expressed his outrage in terms of how Japan portrayed World War II in their textbooks. He declared that while the 2002 Cup must be a win-win situation for both allies, his government holds deep concerns which may impede the success of the tournament. These disputes set the stage for a World Cup filled with controversy and national backlash. Ironically, the start of the tournament seemed to have been a success in terms of signifying a sense of unity between both countries. Both teams qualified for the knockout stages, and fans from both countries were seen celebrating together, as it was the first time Japan had qualified and only the second for South Korea. But that tone shifted fast. As South Korea advanced to the semifinals and Japan was eliminated in the round of 16, Japanese coverage became more competitive and skeptical. News outlets worldwide downplayed Korea's success, framing it less as a shared win and more as a source of quiet resentment, with a large number of sources claiming South Korea had cheated through biased refereeing. South Korea was the first Asian team to reach the semifinals in the history of the tournament, and according to scholars such as Lee 2010 and Cho 2011, this success enhanced South Korea's international visibility and helped lay the groundwork for the Korean Wave, which refers to the global phenomenon of South Korean pop culture's increasing influence on the world stage. The World Cup, along with the release of Korean drama Winter Sonata and the growing popularity of K-pop, all led to the rise in popularity of Korean culture in Japan. However, this was met with backlash from Japan's far right, and scholars such as Sakamoto and Allen 2007 argue that incidents like the World Cup contributed to the flourishing of anti-Korean sentiment in online spaces such as 2channel. The World Cup hosting was seen by many Japanese nationalists as humiliating or frustrating because Japan had to share the stage with Korea. 2channel provided an anonymous space for Japanese users to vent anti-Korean opinions that would have been considered socially unacceptable in public. This created a receptive audience for anti-Korean manga such as Kankan Ryu. Kankan Ryu translates to Hey Korea Wave. It was released in 2005 and would go on to become a bestseller. The manga artist Yamano Sharan claims to have initiated the Hey Korean Wave movement through his manga to counter the growing popularity of Korean culture in Japan. The first chapter suggests that political pressure and lobbying were involved in Korea's wins against Spain and Italy. The artist presents this idea as proof that Korea behaves dishonorably on the international stage. He uses this as a springboard to claim in later chapters that post-war Korean resentment is irrational and historically unjustified. The popularity of this manga reflected an emerging network of nationalism that would later move from online spaces and traditional media to the public sphere. The Hankyorya Korean newspaper states that at the Square Ebora Hall in Tokyo on June 1st, 2013, Japanese far-right organizations including Zaito Kukai had gathered for a meeting of the conservative groups active in Tokyo. The 3-hour gathering was a rare chance to hear the Japanese far-right express their opinions and hear about what started their movement. Although Zaito Kukai had formed in 2006, members at this conference cited the 2002 World Cup as being symbolic of Japan's cultural decline. Yasuhiro Yagi, deputy chairman of Zaito Kukai, described himself as part of Japan's net right wing, and stated that the tournament triggered the first major wave of Koreaphobia on internet forums, which laid the groundwork for later nationalist movements. To the world, the 2002 World Cup was a triumph of cooperation, two nations coming together on the global stage. But under that polished image, something else was building. Online backlash, cultural resentment, and quiet nationalism were already growing. The more unified things looked, the more fractured they really were in reality. While the World Cup wasn't the sole cause of the rise in nationalism in the early 2000s, I argue that it gave it energy and a platform. What began as online frustration quickly crossed into mainstream culture. Manga like Kankan Ryu captured and reinforced the rising anti-Korean sentiment and paved the way for nationalist groups to move from anonymous forums into public organized activism. In conclusion, the 2002 World Cup was meant to bring Japan and South Korea closer, but what it really did was hold up a mirror, showing both countries how far apart they still were. Reconciliation isn't about ceremonies or co-hosting, it's about confronting the past honestly, and that work still hasn't been done. Thank you.